I was never one to believe in strange things, but what happened to me, well, I'm not sure of anything anymore. I work as a parking watchman at night in a very busy area of the city, where the flow of cars never seems to stop. At first, my job was simple. Just stay there, watching the cars, controlling the entrance and exit, making some reports. But something started to happen every night. A specific car, an old model, dark in color, who always parked in the same reserved place, every night, punctually at 3 a.m. The strangest thing of all is that no one ever got out of this car. As much as it was normal for a car to park there, this driver's behavior made me uncomfortable. Every time I passed by to check the vehicles, the car window was always slightly open. I looked and saw a hand coming out of the inside, leaning on the window, as if I were waiting for something or someone. But it always seemed empty inside. No light, no movement, just that deep silence and the figure of that motionless hand. It was as if the car was waiting, but I couldn't understand why. In my head, I thought it was just some crazy guy who liked to stop there at night. But something told me it wasn't that simple. I decided that next time, I would get closer and see what was happening. Fear was starting to consume me, but something inside me said that I needed to understand what was really happening. On a rainy night like all the others, the car was there again, parked in the same place, in the same position, with the window open in the same way. I approached, feeling a chill go up my spine. The hand was there, motionless, and for a moment I hesitated, but then, something made me take a step closer. I crouched and looked out the window. What I saw froze me completely. The figure inside the car was as motionless as the hand. A man, but he was pale, with his eyes closed, as if he were sleeping or dead. The feeling of terror was instantaneous, and I couldn't move a muscle. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I abruptly took my hand out of the window and ran to the cabin to get the radio and call the police. But when I returned to the car, my body almost collapsed. The car was empty. There was no one else inside. And the worst, the plate had been exchanged for a new one. I tried to look for something, a clue, anything, but there was nothing. Just that scary emptiness. I felt dizzy and completely lost. The police's words sounded distant when I tried to tell what had happened. They said they were going to send a patrol, but when they returned there, the car was no longer there. I didn't know what to think. That night, I couldn't sleep, and things only got worse in the following days. In the following days, the car did not appear, but the feeling of being observed intensified. Every time I turned a corner, it seemed like the car was there, following me. The problem was that no one else seemed to notice what was happening. I tried to talk about it with my co-workers, but they laughed and said I was exaggerating, that it was just my mind playing with my fear. But I knew it wasn't that. The presence of that thing, that car, seemed to follow me. At night, at work, whenever I looked at the rearview mirror, the impression that the car was there parked never left me. The idea that I could be being watched made me feel a constant agony. On a particularly rainy night, like the one when everything happened, the car appeared again. But this time, it wasn't parked in the same place as always. He was parked in front of my cabin. I couldn't move. Fear took over me in a way I had never felt before. I looked at the car and felt that something very wrong was happening, something I couldn't explain. The hand, the slightly open window. The feeling that something was watching me, grew even more. The fear of going there, of looking one more time, became a paralysis. I knew that if it went there, things could get even worse. But at the same time, I couldn't help but think, what was inside that car? What did that want with me? I finally decided to go to the car. What haunted me the most was not the car itself, but the idea of never knowing what was happening. I felt I needed to understand, and at the same time, I knew this could be a mistake. Each step towards the car seemed heavier than the previous one. The rain was stronger now, and the darkness enveloped me with a feeling of muffling. The sound of water hitting the floor and the echo of my own steps seemed louder than they really were. When I got close, the car seemed empty, as always. The window was slightly open, but there was no sign of movement. With my heart racing, I looked inside the car, looking for any sign of life. There was no one, as I expected, but the feeling that something was wrong intensified. The driver's seat was empty, but something strange caught my attention. There were fingerprints on the window, as if someone had tried to get out, but didn't. The strangest thing was that the marks were very close to the top of the window, as if someone had stood there, watching for a long time. The agony began to take over me, and I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to leave, get out of there. But before I could get away, one thing broke the absolute silence of the night. A shadow emerged from the passenger seat. I froze. The shadow was human, but there was no one there. She seemed to have formed out of nowhere, a skeletal and dark figure, like a presence that shouldn't be there. I could barely react, but something inside me screamed to run. I turned around and ran to my cabin, my body shaking, my heart beating so hard that I thought I was going to faint. The cabin door was locked, but my hand was shaking so much that I could barely turn the key. I rushed in, panting, and leaned against the wall. The sound of the rain was almost deafening, and my body was cold with fear. I couldn't stop looking at the parking lot, as if I expected to see the car again, but I didn't want to either. Fear was consuming me from the inside out. That shadow was still with me in my mind. I knew something was wrong, that night was not normal. I tried to concentrate on my breathing, trying to calm down, but I couldn't. The tension was palpable. The sound of the rain hitting the car bodywork made me jump, and for a moment, I thought the car was back. But when I looked through the cabin window, there was nothing. The parking lot seemed empty, the rain still fell in torrents, but the feeling of being watched did not go away. I forced myself to go to the computer and check the security cameras, hoping to see something that would tell me that I was just imagining everything. The images were normal, but one thing stood out. The car. He was there, parked in the same place as always. But the most disturbing was the fact that, in the images, the driver's seat was occupied by an indistinct figure, wrapped in a deep darkness. The man was motionless, but I didn't see his eyes. It was as if the camera couldn't capture something so disturbing. With a lump in my throat, I took a closer look. When I saw the details, I almost fell out of the chair. The driver's hands were on the steering wheel, but the fingers were distorted, as if they were melting. And for a moment, something bright passed on the screen, a reflection that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. That's when the cabin radio heist. Did you see that too? I turned quickly, my heart racing. The voice was strange, I didn't recognize it. But the worst part was that she seemed to come from inside the cabin. From where, I didn't know. I looked everywhere, but there was no one there. The radio was silent, and the only sound was the rain. I took a deep breath, trying to control the panic, but I knew there was no turning back. Something was happening there, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The radio was still silent, but the feeling of being watched was even more intense. I looked at the cameras once again, hoping to see something that would bring me a little relief. But the image was distorted, as if something was interfering with the images. The car, the undefined figure in the driver's seat, everything seemed wrong. The tension was unbearable. I was starting to sweat cold. I decided to leave the cabin, breathe some fresh air, try to clear my mind. But when I put my foot outside, the rain increased. My steps were muffled by the accumulated water, and the feeling that something was watching my every move bothered me deeply. I approached the car again, and once again, the window was slightly open. This time, I didn't hesitate. I wanted to know what was going on. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I crouched next to the vehicle and, with a trembling hand, looked inside. The bank was empty. There was no one there. But the smell, a mixture of moisture and something metallic. There was no doubt that something was wrong. I panicked. When I walked away, I saw that the license plate of the car had changed again, but this time, it seemed familiar. It was the same license plate of a car that I had seen parked there months ago, even before I started working as a vigilante. The cold ran down my spine. Somehow, it didn't make sense, but everything seemed connected. I felt that my presence there, in the parking lot, was somehow wrong. As if I were part of something I didn't understand, something bigger. I felt a pressure in my chest, my breathing becoming difficult. I looked around, trying to understand if someone was nearby, but the parking lot was empty, deserted. The yellowish lights reflected the rain, creating an even more sinister environment. Everything seemed normal, but my mind could no longer process reality in a logical way. With my mind in a whirlwind, I decided to go back to the cabin and record what was happening, but when I entered, the radio squealed again. The voice that followed was low, dragged, and almost a whisper. "It's no use anymore." Those words echoed through the cabin, and at that moment, I knew that something was very wrong, but I didn't know what to do. There was no one to help me, and all my attempts to reason had failed. I was alone, with the feeling of being hunted. I tried to call the police, but the cell phone didn't pick up. It was as if the place had been isolated from the rest of the world. I couldn't think straight anymore. The rain was still strong, the noise deafening, but now, I didn't know if the threat came from the car, from inside the cabin, or from something I still couldn't understand. Fear mixed with tiredness, and reality began to distort around me. When the day dawned, and the rain finally stopped, the parking lot was empty. No plate changed, no car with a strange figure. But something inside me knew that all this had been real, and that somehow I had escaped. What, in fact, followed me that night, I will never know. Since I started working at the roadside restaurant, my routine has become more or less the same. I work late, cleaning everything after the last client leaves, and then I come home. The problem is that, in recent weeks, something strange has happened, and I don't know exactly what to think about it. On most nights, the place is calm, with no one around. I stay there, alone, listening to the sound of rain hitting the windows while I finish cleaning. But sometimes something I can't explain happens. First, it was the steps. I could clearly hear someone walking upstairs, but when I went up to check, the place was always empty. I kept thinking it was my mind playing tricks, since the restaurant was old and the floor creaked a lot, but the feeling of being watched never passed. On the night of the storm, everything got worse. I was passing the broom in the inside area, when I saw a shadow pass quickly through the window. I thought it could be some reflection or something in my head, but what scared me the most was the fact that the window was far away from any illuminated place, so there was no way a shadow could have projected itself there like that. I looked hurriedly, but I didn't see anything. At the time, I felt a strong chill down my spine, but I tried to ward off that feeling. I talked to the owner about it the next morning, thinking that maybe he knew something that could help me understand what was happening. But he just said that the restaurant had gone through a very serious fire years ago, and several people were trapped up there. His gaze was empty, as if he had remembered something bad. When he talked about the fire, a strange feeling took over me. I didn't want to believe it, but I started to wonder if maybe the people who died that night were still here. The next night, everything seemed quiet, but something in the air was different. The noise of the storm outside seemed more intense than usual, and the restaurant was completely empty. I was finishing cleaning, my mind still stuck in the owner's words, when I heard the steps again. But this time, they weren't coming from upstairs. They came from inside the hall, as if someone was walking around me. The heart shot, and I stopped in the middle of the corridor, trying to listen more carefully. The sound seemed to move, as if the person was slowly approaching. I took a deep breath and, without making noise, I took one of the flashlights that were on one of the shelves. I was already about to go up to check, but a snack coming from the bottom of the restaurant made me freeze. It was a slamming door, but there was no wind. I knew the restaurant was completely closed, so who or what could be doing that? I decided to be brave and went there. The flashlight illuminated the path, and the steps in my wake seemed closer and closer. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but I knew something was wrong. When I got to the door, I saw something that made me tremble with fear. The doorknob was turning slowly alone. I screamed, asking if anyone was there, but the only answer was the sound of the wood creaking, as if I was being pushed by someone. I took a deep breath and pushed the door, ready to confront whatever it was. When she finally opened, the flashlight lit up the room, but there was no one there. However, the feeling that something was there, watching, was palpable. I began to ask myself, what if the people who died in the fire were still trapped in that place, waiting to be found? The owner had said that there were people there at that fateful moment, but he never mentioned that there was something else, something supernatural. Something that was still wandering around there, waiting for a new guest. Before I could process my thoughts, a shadow quickly passed through the kitchen window, just like on the night of the storm. I ran to look, but when I opened the curtain, I only saw the empty street and the rain falling heavily. The feeling that I wasn't alone, however, was undeniable. Something was following me. Something was watching me. Fear squeezed my chest like a cold hand. Whatever it was, he didn't seem willing to leave me alone so easily. Fear swallowed me, but I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't continue there, trapped in these inexplicable shadows and sounds. I decided to leave the restaurant once and for all. I took my jacket and went towards the front door, but when I got close, I saw that it was closed. I don't remember closing the door. I took a deep breath and tried not to panic, but something inside me started screaming that I wasn't supposed to leave, that I needed to face what was happening. When taking a step back, the sound of footsteps upstairs echoed again. They weren't steps from someone who was following me, but heavy steps, as if something or someone was dragging on the floor. I froze. It was not just a sound of wood creaking or something moving, but something deeper, sharper, as if the building was breathing with a presence much older than himself. The pain in my chest increased. I was being pressured to stay to look. I felt a growing chill down my spine, as if something was watching, waiting for me to make the mistake of approaching where the fire had happened. Something that was never forgotten. The victims of the fire, the restaurant, everything was connected. I could feel it. With the flashlight light shaking in my hands, I went to the stairs. The steps continued, but this time faster, as if something was going down, going towards me. As I went up, an acrid and old smell took over the air, like the smell of burnt wood, of something that never healed. When I looked at the top of the stairs, I saw a silhouette standing in the corridor, with a shadow that extended to me. I couldn't tell if it was human or something else, something that shouldn't be there. "Get out of here," I muttered to myself. "Leave now." But, as a reflex, my legs moved, bringing me closer and closer to this presence. My flashlight blinked, and the room where the fire happened appeared in my vision. The fire had consumed much of the structure, but the smell of smoke still seemed impregnated in the walls, as if it was waiting for me. I didn't know what I was waiting for. In an impulse, I ran to the nearest exit and managed to open the back door, closing in the rain outside. The strong wind and cold water hit my face, but that didn't calm me down. The feeling that something was chasing me, that the presence in that restaurant had not left, made me look over my shoulder at every step I took towards the car. That night was the last time I stepped into the restaurant. Since then, the place has remained closed, but every time I pass by there, I see the shadows moving through the window, as if something was waiting. Something or someone. I don't know what exactly happened in that restaurant, but I know it wasn't just the fire that left marks. Something or someone is still there waiting, watching. And to this day, I can't forget the pale face of that silhouette at the top of the stairs. I never really liked working at night, but the early morning has always had its ups and downs. The city becomes quieter, but also stranger. There is always that feeling that time passes more slowly, and the sound of the streets seems more distant, almost as if the world were further away. One night, I started receiving some calls from an address that I didn't use to pick up. It was an area away from the city, very close to one of those old cemeteries that we only see in movies. It's not the kind of place where there are usually people asking for a taxi, but since the price was good, I decided to accept it. I went to the address. The place seemed deserted, as if no one lived there. When I arrived, the man who appeared seemed very strange. He got into the car and didn't say anything. He just settled in the back seat. I tried to start a conversation, as I always do with the passengers, to break the ice, but he didn't answer. He just stayed there, with his eyes fixed on his front, as if he were in another world. It started to bother me. I looked at the rearview mirror, and he didn't look back at me. He just looked oblivious, immersed in his own thoughts. Or maybe he wasn't even thinking about anything. The silence in those empty streets only increased the strangeness of the situation. I began to feel a feeling of growing discomfort, as if someone was watching me. I looked at the mirrors, but saw nothing but the dark road ahead. The trip went on in silence, and I couldn't understand what was happening. The man didn't even make a move, nothing. Not even when passing through busier places, he gave a sign of life. When we were passing through an old cemetery, something strange happened. The car just died. It didn't make noise, it didn't give a sign of breakdown, it just stopped. I tried to start the engine again, but nothing happened. The silence in that part of the city was almost deafening, and the cold in the spine began to grow. I got out of the car, worried, and went to check what could have happened. The man in the back seat hadn't moved a millimeter. It was then that, in the middle of that silence, I felt a pressure in my chest, as if someone was watching me closely, but at the same time, I couldn't see anything. I went back to the car and, when I looked at the back seat, it was empty. The passenger simply disappeared. I stood there looking, trying to understand what was happening. I even tried to call the taxi company's number, but the cell phone didn't pick up properly in that area. Something wasn't right, and I didn't know what to do. The worst of all was that, when I took a look at the cemetery, what I saw was even more disturbing. A figure standing on the edge, looking at the car. It was as if that place, that road, had become a horror movie, but I didn't know how I had come to it. I was trying to process everything that had happened, still in shock, but my mind kept questioning. What had I seen there? Where had the man gone? I looked at the empty bench, and felt the weight of a presence that was no longer there, but somehow still was. I don't know how, but a feeling of anguish took over me. My eyes began to fix more and more in that cemetery, as if an invisible force was calling me to go there. Even with the dead car and the intense cold, I couldn't take my eyes off the entrance. And that's when a strange idea came up in my head. What if I had caught someone who was no longer alive? With my heart beating fast and my breathing racing, I finally decided to get out of the car and walk to the cemetery. I don't know what led me to do that. It was as if something was pulling me, guiding me to that place. When I arrived at the entrance, the feeling of being watched increased even more, but I didn't see anyone. I looked around and began to approach the tombstones. It was then that something made me look at a specific point of the cemetery, and I saw the name engraved on one of the stones. João Alves. The name sounded familiar to me, but I couldn't identify where. When I looked more closely, I realized something disturbing. The date of his death was many years ago, just at the time when the strange man I had caught died. The cold in my spine intensified, and I ran back to the car desperate. My head was a mess. I couldn't stop thinking about that name, João Alves, and the date of death. It was as if the world had taken a turn. I ran back to the car, not knowing exactly what was happening, but feeling a tightness in my chest. The only thing I wanted at that moment was to get out of there as soon as possible. I got into the car, but the engine was still dead, as if nothing had changed. I looked at the driver's seat, still empty, and for a moment I felt as if the man had returned to be there, watching me. I was forced to start the car again, hoping it would pick it up. Time seemed to be stopped. When the engine finally started, the sound was like a relief, but the feeling that something was wrong didn't disappear. I looked out the window once again at the cemetery, and this time, I swore to see a figure between the tombstones. But when it blinked, it disappeared. It was getting harder and harder to distinguish what was real from what I was imagining. I knew I needed to get out of that region, but the feeling that the man was still somehow there with me didn't leave me alone. I started driving, but it seemed that the streets were getting narrower and the night denser as I moved away from the cemetery. Every street, every curve, made me feel like something was chasing me. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw nothing, but I still felt a chill, as if I were being watched. I even thought it could have been a nightmare, but the feeling persisted, and it wasn't something you could just ignore. All I wanted was to go home, take a shower, and forget that damn work that night. As I approached the city, I began to feel that the tension was finally starting to subside. The street was brighter, the houses closer, and the feeling of being watched seemed to dissipate. I tried to rationalize everything, thinking it was just fear taking care of me, but the truth is that I knew something wasn't right. I was on edge, and, even with the city in sight, I couldn't get rid of the image of that man's face. He was in my mind, more vivid than anything. I turned off the radio, trying to focus, trying to drive away that strange feeling that accompanied me. I just wanted to get home and sleep. When I finally entered the city, my cell phone began to vibrate. I was so tense that I almost got scared. It was a message from my boss, asking about the race. I took a deep breath and decided to answer, trying to calm down. But when I looked at the message, I saw something that made my blood freeze. He had sent me a photo of a web page, showing an article from an old newspaper. The title said, "Man found dead in remote cemetery, inexplicable case." I was paralyzed for a second, looking at the cell phone screen. The man's name? João Alves. The place? The cemetery where I had passed that night. I felt as if the floor had disappeared under my feet. My boss then wrote, "Did you see this man over there? They say he was a spirit that appeared to lonely taxi drivers." I couldn't answer. I knew the answer was there, in front of me, but I didn't want to accept it. I looked in the rearview mirror, hoping not to see anything, but something was telling me that he was there, even if he wasn't. I stayed there for a few seconds, standing still, in the middle of the street, not knowing what to do. Fear was paralyzing me, but at the same time, something inside me told me not to ignore what was happening. I looked once again in the rearview mirror, hoping he was behind me, but there was nothing. Only the darkness. Even so, something bothered me. I knew that hadn't been a coincidence. It couldn't be. I've never, in my entire career as a taxi driver, caught someone so strange. And with that detail of my boss's message, I couldn't help but think that maybe the man had never really left the cemetery. Maybe he had never left there. That night it seemed to have dragged on for hours, but soon I was at home, parking the car in the garage. Even with the feeling of relief for having arrived safely, fear still haunted me. I locked the car, entered the house, and went straight to the shower, trying to get rid of any trace of that feeling that still accompanied me. When I got out of the shower and went to get my cell phone, it was on by itself, with the screen on. There was a new message. Curiosity took over me, and I almost jumped in fright when I saw the name on the screen. João Alves. It wasn't a contact number that I recognized. I opened the message with trembling hands. "You didn't leave me behind. Now you're going to take me again." The message was empty, with nothing but those words. I brought an icy air into my lungs and threw the cell phone on the bed. How did he know my number? And the scariest thing, how did he know where I lived? The answers were starting to form in my mind, but I didn't want to accept them. I just wanted that night to end. I spent the night awake, thinking about what had happened, trying to understand how all that fit. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me alone. I tried to rationalize everything I had lived that night, telling myself that it was just a coincidence. But something inside me said it wasn't. When the sun finally began to rise, I felt more exhausted than ever, and when I looked out the window, I saw the quiet street as always. No movement, no strange shadow. I tried to forget all that and continue with my routine, but when I got to work the next day, my boss called me. He had a closed expression, and as soon as I entered the room, he showed me something that made my spine cold. It was an old black and white photo of a man standing in front of the cemetery that I had passed the night before. He was wearing a dark shirt, and his eyes, expressionless, seemed fixed on the camera. The strangest thing of all is that this man was, without a doubt, the passenger I had taken that night. I was speechless. How was that possible? How could he be there, in that photo, if I knew he was already dead? My boss told me with a frightening calm that that man had died years ago, in an accident on that same road, and that his body had been found near the cemetery. At first, he thought it was a misunderstanding, but after seeing the expression on my face, he just gave me a look and, in a low voice, said, "You're not the first to make this trip,